A story about cops versus the mafia and the corrupt fight against organized crime that will surprise you. Chicago, 1931. The city is alive in a rhythm that is both mesmerizing and terrifying, a symphony of neon lights reflecting off slick, rain-soaked streets, the rhythmic clatter of trolley tracks underfoot, and the constant hum of industry mingled with the whispers of those who live in shadows. Every alleyway, every narrow street corner, every dimly lit storefront could conceal danger, a gun tucked under a coat, a deal being made in hushed tones, a life about to end for the sake of power or money. The mafia is not merely present in this city, it dominates it, silently yet decisively, threading itself through politics, business, and law enforcement like a malignant vine. Officers like Detective Samuel Hayes walk these streets fully aware that every glance, every conversation could be observed. He knows that for every criminal caught, dozens more operate in plain sight, shielded by fear, bribery, and the complicity of those who should uphold the law. Hayes is no rookie. He's seen the system crumble from within, watched his colleagues bend, break, or disappear under the pressure of corruption. He knows the city's heartbeat, the subtle signals of criminal movement, the difference between empty threats and lethal intent. Every day is a delicate negotiation between instinct and strategy, between courage and prudence. He has witnessed bribes being exchanged in the shadows of City Hall, judges bending verdicts to accommodate the rich and ruthless, and newspapers quietly burying stories that could threaten the fragile balance of power. In this environment, Hayes understands one irrefutable truth. To challenge the mafia, one must operate on a level equal to their cunning, intelligence, and ruthlessness. The detective's first days on the trail are exhausting, filled with hours of silent observation, waiting in dark corners for signs of life, listening for the subtlest cues, a footstep, a whispered conversation, the distinct rhythm of a boot on cobblestone. He studies the habits of those he tracks, noting their patterns, understanding how they communicate without words, how power is exercised in both obvious and subtle ways. In this city, violence is just one tool in the mafia's arsenal. Equally powerful are fear, intimidation, and the illusion of omnipresence. Hayes quickly learns that every interaction could be a trap, every informant a potential double agent, every street a battlefield where one wrong move could mean death. He begins to piece together the structure of the organization, noticing how each segment operates almost like a corporate entity. Warehouses and distribution points as logistical centers, legitimate businesses serving as fronts for illegal activities, communication networks protected by codes and secret couriers, and enforcers ensuring that loyalty is maintained through both reward and fear. Hayes notes how even small decisions in the criminal hierarchy ripple outward, influencing financial flows, political outcomes, and the lives of ordinary citizens. He realizes that dismantling this system will require more than arrests. It will demand patience, careful planning, and the courage to face consequences that could range from the loss of his career to death itself. The city feels alive in ways that are almost sentient. Hayes senses the pulse of power as he moves through neighborhoods, the invisible threads connecting bar owners to politicians, dock workers to gang leaders, and bribed policemen to violent enforcers. He notes the smallest of details. A door left ajar in a building that should be locked. The pattern of deliveries to a seemingly ordinary grocery store. The faces of those who pass too quickly down the street. These are not mere observations. They are survival skills, intelligence gathering, and the early steps in a war that few outside these streets can even perceive. Each night, Hayes reviews the notes he's taken, cross-referencing stories from terrified informants, tracking the flow of illicit money, and predicting movements of those who believe themselves untouchable. He feels the weight of responsibility, knowing that a single misstep could destroy lives, derail investigations, or even result in his own death. Yet, there is a fire that drives him, a mixture of duty, obsession, and an unwavering belief that the city's future cannot be dictated by fear and corruption. In those quiet hours, he plans, strategizes, and anticipates, creating a mental map of power, influence, and opportunity, preparing for the inevitable confrontation between law and the ruthless organization that controls Chicago from the shadows. Hayes knows the road ahead is perilous. Enforcers lurk in every dark corner, loyal to leaders who value obedience over morality. Political alliances shift unpredictably, and any officer could be compromised at a moment's notice. But the detective has one advantage: clarity of purpose. While the Mafia relies on fear, secrecy, and manipulation, Hayes relies on meticulous observation, cunning, and the ability to anticipate moves before they are made. The city is a chessboard, and every citizen, from the lowliest street vendor to the mayor himself, is a piece in a game that is dangerous, complex, and lethal. For Hayes, survival and justice are inseparable. One cannot exist without the other. And so, the stage is set. Chicago's streets are alive with danger, opportunity, and deception. Detective Hayes steps forward into the night, fully aware of the risks, yet undeterred. Every alleyway, every shadow, every whispered conversation is a test of his skill, patience, and courage. The city will challenge him at every turn, demanding that he adapt, strategize, and act with precision. Failure is not an option, not because the law depends on him alone, but because the people, the innocent, and even the soul of the city depend on him to navigate this web of power, fear, and corruption without succumbing to it. Hayes's investigation begins in earnest. He moves cautiously, knowing every decision could have consequences that ripple far beyond his immediate understanding. His first steps involve mapping the web of the outfit's influence across the city. He studies the patterns of known enforcers, tracing connections between local taverns, warehouses, and front businesses. Each location, each person, becomes a piece of the puzzle. Hayes realizes quickly that this is not a mere street gang. It is a sophisticated organization with hierarchies, communication protocols, and financial networks rivaling legitimate corporations. Every member has a role. Some run day-to-day operations, others collect payments, and some provide intelligence, watching the police as much as the citizens. At night, Hayes shadows suspects, moving silently along fire escapes, ducking into alleys, and listening to conversations through the thin walls of tenement buildings. The city is alive with whispers, coded phrases, and gestures that only the initiated understand. Hayes begins to recognize patterns: when a shipment is scheduled, how bribes are delivered, who reports to whom. Even the smallest detail, a marked delivery crate, a subtle change in a clerk's routine, becomes a critical piece of information. His mind is constantly calculating probabilities, assessing risk, and predicting outcomes. He notes the fear in the eyes of ordinary citizens who encounter enforcers, the silent nods between corrupt officials, and the tense energy in illegal gambling dens. As weeks pass, Hayes gains insight into the outfit's financial system. He discovers that profits from bootlegging flow into legitimate businesses, masking their origins. Laundering schemes are intricate, involving layered transactions through banks, real estate, and nightclubs. Hayes documents each connection meticulously, understanding that dismantling the outfit will require more than arrests. It will demand cutting off money, isolating leaders, and exposing corruption in ways that the city's elite would never anticipate. He begins recruiting informants, ordinary citizens willing to risk everything for justice. But even these relationships are precarious. One wrong word, one moment of hesitation could alert the outfit and put lives in immediate danger. Hayes trains his sources to communicate discreetly using signals, coded messages, and indirect language. He creates a network of intelligence that spans the city, feeding him critical insights into criminal operations, rivalries, and emerging threats. Violence is ever present, but Hayes notices its calculated nature. The outfit uses terror strategically, not indiscriminately. Shootings and disappearances are messages designed to maintain obedience and control. Hayes studies these incidents, learning to predict the timing, location, and intended targets. He realizes that fear is a weapon as potent as bullets, and that those who wield it understand the psychology of the streets better than any lawman. Hayes also faces internal challenges. Fellow officers are often compromised either through fear, bribery, or personal gain. Trust is scarce, and alliances are fragile. Hayes must navigate this treacherous environment, carefully selecting partners, verifying information, and guarding his own movements. Each day is a balancing act, too aggressive, and he risks exposure, too cautious, and opportunities slip away. Through all this, Hayes begins to see the city differently. He understands that Chicago is not just a collection of neighborhoods and streets. It is a living, breathing entity shaped by power, fear, loyalty, and ambition. The Mafia has learned to manipulate every aspect of urban life, from transportation to politics, from media to commerce. Hayes's mission is no longer just about catching criminals. It is about understanding the invisible threads that hold this complex ecosystem together and finding the precise moment to sever them. The detective's days blend into nights of relentless observation, note-taking, and strategy. He memorizes patterns, predicts behavior, and creates mental maps of influence. He studies the psychology of those who enforce, those who obey, and those who profit silently. Hayes understands that a single piece of evidence, a single testimony, or a single misstep could topple the delicate balance of the investigation. Yet, despite the weight of responsibility, he moves forward with unwavering focus, knowing that each risk taken is a step closer to dismantling a criminal empire that has held the city in its grip for too long. The city had become a living labyrinth, each alleyway and back street a potential trap. Hayes felt it in every step he took, the faintest whisper of footsteps behind him, the subtle glance from a man loitering near a warehouse, the sudden hush in a crowded tavern. He knew that the outfit's eyes were everywhere, and that the moment he misstepped, he could vanish like so many others before him. Yet, Hayes thrived in this tension, letting his instincts sharpen, his senses expand, his mind race. He had to understand the rhythm of the streets, as if the city itself were a predator stalking him. Hayes intensified his surveillance operations. He spent days watching docks where shipments were unloaded, observing how crates moved, noting the shifts of guards, and recognizing patterns in delivery schedules. He memorized the faces of drivers, waiters, and night watchmen, cataloging each subtle signal of loyalty or fear. Hayes realized that the outfit was a master of disguise and deception. Ordinary businesses, restaurants, laundries, even legitimate construction companies served as fronts for illicit operations. What appeared as normal commerce was, in fact, a complex network of smuggling, money laundering, and intelligence gathering. Every transaction, every handshake, every invoice held hidden meaning. Violence remained a constant, though Hayes noticed it was surgical. The outfit rarely killed without purpose. Murders were statements, lessons in obedience. He pored over police reports, newspapers, and witness accounts, cross-referencing them with his own observations. He recognized the patterns in timing, location, and victim selection. The killings were psychological warfare, aimed not just at rivals, but at the population itself, instilling fear and ensuring compliance. Hayes studied this closely, knowing that understanding their strategy would be as crucial as gathering evidence. Corruption was Hayes's most insidious obstacle. He discovered that law enforcement itself had been infiltrated, with officers on the payroll, quietly protecting criminal operations. Every conversation became a test of trust. Every alliance was fragile. Hayes had to create redundancies in his information network, verifying intelligence through multiple independent sources. He trained informants to use subtle codes, gestures, and signals, ensuring that even if intercepted, the messages would remain meaningless to outsiders. These citizens, ordinary people risking extraordinary danger, became his lifeline, providing insights that would have been impossible to obtain otherwise. Hayes's nights were often sleepless, spent compiling intelligence, connecting dots, and predicting moves. He mapped out the outfit's hierarchy, identifying the inner circle, the lieutenants, and the operatives. He observed the flow of money, how profits from alcohol, gambling, and protection rackets traveled through layers of legitimate enterprises, obscuring their origin. Hayes realized that the fight was no longer just about catching criminals. It was about dismantling an entire ecosystem. To strike the outfit effectively, he would need to attack both its muscle and its brain, its enforcers and its financiers, in a coordinated effort. The detective also grappled with human complexity. Some operatives were ruthless, others conflicted. Many quietly resented the hierarchy that demanded loyalty under threat of death. Hayes sought to exploit these fractures, quietly whispering promises of safety and leniency, appealing to self-preservation and morality. He understood the psychological calculus of fear, ambition, and survival better than most. He knew that a single defection or confession could unravel years of planning and control. Amidst all this, Hayes began seeing the city not as a battleground but as a living organism. The outfit's influence permeated everything: commerce, politics, law enforcement, media, even public opinion. He realized that power was not only about violence, but also about control over perception, information, and resources. Every bribe, every threatened witness, every staged event contributed to an invisible lattice of authority that the public rarely comprehended. Hayes's challenge was to find the gaps in this lattice, the weak, points where justice could penetrate. Hayes also developed a personal code. Patience, observation, and meticulous planning were more powerful than reckless heroism. He learned to resist the impulse to confront directly, instead favoring strategies that allowed him to manipulate outcomes subtly. He anticipated moves, predicted reactions, and prepared contingencies. Each night became a chess match, each day a series of calculated maneuvers. In his mind, the city was a board of complex interactions, and he was maneuvering both pawns and kings to achieve a single goal: dismantling an empire built on fear and secrecy. Through tireless work, Hayes began to piece together a detailed portrait of the outfit's operations, identifying patterns that even seasoned members overlooked. He understood the timing of shipments, the coordination of violent acts, and the web of corruption protecting them. He discovered that the outfit's strength was both in their organization and in the unpredictability they projected, making opponents underestimate them while secretly maintaining control over nearly every aspect of city life. The detective's resolve grew. He realized that defeating the outfit required more than courage. It demanded intelligence, strategy, and endurance. He embraced the complexity, acknowledging that failure could cost lives, yet each success, no matter how small, brought him closer to dismantling a criminal empire that had dominated Chicago for decades. Hayes's journey was no longer just about enforcing the law. It was about understanding power, mastering strategy, and navigating a world where every decision could change the balance between life and death. The city never slept, and neither could Hayes. Each day, he moved through streets that pulsed with hidden energy, sensing dangers invisible to the casual observer. He had learned to read subtle signals, the abrupt change in tone when a passerby mentioned a name, the nervous glance of a bartender when someone asked too many questions, the carefully arranged crates in a warehouse that hinted at illegal contents. Every detail mattered. Every interaction could reveal a fragment of the outfit's sprawling network. Hayes became a shadow among shadows, blending into the background, while the city buzzed obliviously around him. The detective's understanding of human behavior deepened with each passing day. He realized that fear was a more potent tool than violence itself. The outfit had mastered it. People obeyed not because of bullets, but because of the invisible weight of consequences, the knowledge that a misstep could ruin not just them, but their entire family. Hayes studied these social dynamics meticulously, identifying which individuals were loyal out of belief, fear, or greed. By mapping these motivations, he could anticipate moves, predict betrayals, and exploit weaknesses. He began constructing a psychological map of the organization as intricate as the city's physical layout. Hayes's investigation revealed that the outfit's influence extended far beyond the obvious criminal acts. They controlled neighborhoods through subtle mechanisms. Landlords intimidated tenants into silence. Business owners paid invisible taxes to ensure protection, and even journalists were quietly steered to shape public perception. Hayes had to untangle this web without alerting the conspirators. One wrong move could expose his informants, destroy trust, and allow the outfit to adapt. He spent nights developing cryptic communication methods, using signals and coded language that would remain meaningless if intercepted. Every message, every meeting, every observation became a critical piece in a sprawling puzzle. While surveillance provided insight, Hayes knew that direct evidence was required for meaningful action. He began orchestrating careful operations to catch members in compromising positions, shadowing shipments, intercepting communications, and documenting illegal transactions. These operations were dangerous. The slightest error could result in violence or death. Hayes relied on patience, waiting for the perfect moment when the outfit's confidence lulled them into predictable behavior. He learned to embrace the tension, understanding that the city's chaos could be manipulated in his favor if he remained disciplined and observant. The detective also faced ethical dilemmas. Some informants were desperate, coerced into cooperation, while others had personal grudges against the outfit. Hayes had to navigate these murky waters carefully, ensuring that his actions advanced justice without becoming tainted by manipulation or exploitation. Each choice carried weight. A misjudged promise or a misinterpreted threat could compromise months of painstaking work. He reflected on the nature of power and loyalty, realizing that understanding people, their fears, desires, and ambitions was as crucial as understanding the organization itself. Amidst this complexity, Hayes discovered internal fractures within the outfit. Rivalries, resentment, and ambition simmered beneath the surface, creating opportunities for exploitation. He noted moments of hesitation, disputes over territory, and conflicts between long-standing lieutenants and newer members. These internal tensions became focal points for strategic maneuvers. By subtly nudging the organization's dynamics through rumor, anonymous tips, or carefully placed evidence, Hayes could amplify dissent and create pressure points that weakened cohesion. Every interaction became a strategic play, every observation a potential lever. Hayes's nights often ended in exhaustion, walking empty streets with only the echoes of distant traffic and the faintest sounds of hidden activity. Yet he felt a growing sense of mastery over his environment. He could predict the ebb and flow of activity, anticipate criminal movements, and interpret subtle cues that others missed entirely. The city, once chaotic and overwhelming, became a map of patterns, vulnerabilities, and opportunities. Hayes was no longer merely reacting. He was shaping the flow of events, influencing outcomes without being seen. The detective also explored the financial arteries of the outfit, tracing profits from speakeasies, gambling dens, and protection rackets through layers of legitimate businesses. He discovered how cash flowed invisibly, disguised through construction projects, import-export firms, and even charity donations. This financial intelligence was vital. While muscle enforced obedience, money ensured survival. Hayes knew that hitting these arteries could cripple operations more effectively than confronting enforcers. He developed plans to document transactions, identify money laundering schemes, and build cases that could withstand legal scrutiny. Through relentless observation, careful planning, and strategic engagement, Hayes built a comprehensive understanding of the outfit's operations, vulnerabilities, and social dynamics. The detective realized that the fight was not merely about arresting criminals, it was about dismantling an intricate ecosystem, one that combined power, perception, fear, and loyalty into a resilient, adaptive network. Hayes's challenge was to unravel this network without triggering defensive reactions that could undo months of work. Every step required precision, foresight, and patience. By now, Hayes had become a master of shadows, a strategist who navigated the city with acute awareness and calculated action. He understood that success would not come from single acts of heroism, but through cumulative, deliberate steps that exploited both human psychology and organizational weaknesses. The fight against the outfit was no longer a series of reactive measures. It had become a long game of influence, manipulation, and insight, where each decision could shift the balance of power. Hayes's resolve solidified. He would see this struggle through, knowing that victory depended on intelligence, strategy, and unwavering discipline. The city's nights became Hayes's classroom, a place where shadows taught lessons in survival, deception, and control. Every flickering streetlight, every distant footstep, and every whispered conversation was a data point, a clue in the sprawling narrative of the outfit's operations. Hayes had learned that power was often invisible, hidden in the structures people built, the loyalties they cultivated, and the unspoken threats that kept neighborhoods under control. He began to see the city not as concrete and steel, but as a living organism with arteries, nerve centers, and vulnerable nodes that could be manipulated with precision. Hayes's understanding of human behavior became increasingly sophisticated. He could sense tension in a room before anyone spoke, detect subtle changes in tone that hinted at deception, and interpret body language with near-perfect accuracy. These skills were not innate. They were honed through nights of patient observation and countless close encounters with both allies and adversaries. Each interaction, each misstep or revelation, was meticulously cataloged in his mind. He began to anticipate the moves of outfit members before they even occurred, predicting betrayals, alliances, and potential violence. It was as if he could see the invisible chessboard upon which the city's power struggles were being played. The detective's operations expanded beyond surveillance. He orchestrated subtle interventions that tested the loyalty of individuals, probed the boundaries of influence, and gathered critical intelligence without exposing his presence. Hayes learned to leverage fear and ambition, understanding that these emotions could be tools as effective as any legal procedure. By planting carefully crafted information, he could provoke rivalries, induce paranoia, and manipulate decisions that weaken the outfit's cohesion. Violence was only a last resort. His power came from subtlety, timing, and psychological insight. Financial operations became a key focus. Hayes traced money flows from speakeasies, gambling dens, and illicit businesses into legitimate enterprises, uncovering patterns that revealed both the scale and the strategy of the outfit. Shell companies, construction firms, and even philanthropic ventures were used to launder profits, shield operations, and cultivate influence among politicians and law enforcement. Hayes realized that disrupting these channels could be more effective than targeting enforcers directly. He meticulously documented transactions, memorized networks of ownership, and identified potential leverage points, all while remaining invisible to the criminal organization. Hayes also encountered moral complexity in his work. Informants had their own agendas. Some were coerced, others acted out of revenge, and some were simply trying to survive in a world where trust was a rare commodity. The detective had to navigate these intricate relationships carefully, ensuring that his use of informants advanced justice without exploiting desperation or causing collateral damage. Each promise, threat, or piece of guidance carried weight, and a single misjudgment could compromise months of intelligence gathering. Hayes became acutely aware of the thin line between manipulation and strategy, a line that required constant vigilance. Meanwhile, the outfit's internal fractures provided opportunities. Rivalries simmered, alliances shifted, and ambition created fissures in even the most disciplined ranks. Hayes observed disputes over territory, resentment among long-standing lieutenants, and conflicts between veterans and new recruits. By amplifying these tensions through rumor, anonymous tips, or strategically revealed intelligence, Hayes could destabilize the organization from within. The detective's interventions were subtle, almost imperceptible, but they sowed seeds of doubt and mistrust that would later prove invaluable in dismantling the outfit's power. Hayes's nights were a blend of tension and clarity. Walking empty streets, he absorbed the pulse of the city, noting patterns in traffic, the timing of patrols, and the subtle cues that indicated illicit activity. He began to predict where criminal operations would take place, which enforcers were likely to act, and which neighborhoods were vulnerable. Each observation was recorded mentally, contributing to a complex, dynamic map of power, influence, and risk. The city, once chaotic, had become a puzzle to solve, a living system whose weaknesses could be exploited with patience and precision. The detective also refined his understanding of the outfit's methods for controlling populations. Fear, loyalty, and financial incentives intertwined to maintain dominance. Neighborhoods were not simply policed, they were governed through invisible hierarchies, unspoken rules, and threats that extended beyond the individual to families and communities. Hayes realized that effective intervention required more than arrests. It demanded disrupting the social fabric that allowed the outfit to operate unchallenged. His strategies evolved to include influencing perception, exposing corruption subtly, and leveraging the ambitions and fears of both criminals and allies alike. As Hayes's knowledge and influence grew, he became increasingly confident in his ability to orchestrate complex operations. He could stage surveillance, manipulate rivalries, track financial flows, and predict behavior with remarkable accuracy. Each action was deliberate, calculated, and part of a larger strategy to destabilize the outfit and restore a semblance of justice to the city. Hayes understood that victory would not come from brute force, but from mastery of information, timing, and the intricate psychology of power. Every decision, every movement, every interaction was part of a larger tapestry of strategy that, if executed flawlessly, could bring down one of the most powerful criminal organizations in history. By this point, Hayes had become more than a detective. He had become an architect of influence, a strategist who operated in the shadows, shaping events without ever being seen. The city's rhythms, its human interactions, and the very structure of its neighborhoods were now instruments he could use to achieve his goals. Hayes had transformed the fight against organized crime from a reactive struggle into a deliberate, calculated campaign, where every observation, every interaction, and every decision contributed to the eventual dismantling of a criminal empire. The city never slept, and neither did Hayes's mind. Each night became a battlefield of perception, intuition, and careful orchestration. He no longer simply followed leads, he created them, shaping events from the shadows to expose weakness, manipulate behavior, and dismantle the outfit's control layer by layer. Every encounter, whether with low-level operatives, informants, or corrupt officials, became a calculated maneuver in a game where one misstep could mean failure, exposure, or even death. Hayes's understanding of human psychology had reached an almost preternatural level. He could predict reactions before they occurred, anticipate alliances, and spot betrayal within a room before a word was spoken. He began cataloging patterns of behavior among criminals who sought power, who craved approval, who could be intimidated, and who might defect under pressure. Each profile allowed him to tailor strategies uniquely, using leverage, suggestion, or subtle threats to bend the social fabric of the outfit without revealing his presence. Hayes's mind had become a precision instrument, scanning, calculating, and strategizing with relentless efficiency. Financial intelligence became his most powerful weapon. Hayes meticulously traced the flow of illicit funds, speakeasies, illegal gambling dens, and bootlegging operations were part of a vast network, feeding into legitimate businesses and shell corporations. Each transaction, each payment, each under-the-table contract represented a potential key to unlock the outfit's vulnerabilities. Hayes coordinated covert monitoring, intercepted communications, and pieced together the full picture of financial control. Money, more than guns or fear, was the lifeblood of the outfit. And by understanding it, Hayes could predict behavior, influence decisions, and target the organization's most critical nodes. While his mastery of information grew, Hayes faced increasing moral complexity. Informants had personal agendas. Civilians could be unknowingly caught in the crossfire. Colleagues sometimes acted recklessly or selfishly. Every decision Hayes made required balancing justice, efficiency, and ethics. He had to manipulate, coerce, or negotiate without tipping the scales too far, because a single miscalculation could unravel months of painstaking work. Hayes became acutely aware of the fine line between lawful enforcement, psychological strategy, and tactical deception, walking it with precision and care. The outfit, despite its external strength, showed cracks under scrutiny. Rivalries between lieutenants simmered beneath polished surfaces. Territorial disputes and grievances over profits created tension that Hayes could exploit. He subtly amplified rivalries, allowing rumors to fester and ambitions to clash, all while remaining unseen. He created an environment in which distrust grew within the organization, weakening coordination and sowing the seeds for eventual disruption. The city's streets, once dominated by fear, became an invisible chessboard where Hayes moved pieces silently, leaving the appearance of chaos while orchestrating calculated results. Hayes's operations extended into manipulation of law enforcement and political figures. Corruption was a weapon as much as any firearm. By strategically revealing information, making alliances, and leveraging the ambitions of police officers, inspectors, and elected officials, Hayes gained indirect control over operations without drawing attention to himself. He used knowledge as a shield and a sword, shaping outcomes while avoiding direct confrontation. Through clever use of intelligence and leverage, Hayes could provoke action, prevent interference, and ensure the success of key interventions against the outfit's operations. In the field, Hayes became a master of observation. Empty streets, silent buildings, flickering lights, and subtle shifts in public behavior provided him clues about criminal activity. Hayes could determine which neighborhoods were vulnerable, which operations were in motion, and where the outfit was overreaching or exposed. He cataloged patterns, memorized routines, and developed predictive models in his mind that allowed him to forecast the organization's actions days or weeks in advance. This proactive approach transformed law enforcement from reactionary to strategic, giving Hayes the edge against a powerful adversary. Violence, though present, was now a tool of last resort. Hayes understood that unnecessary aggression could destroy delicate networks of intelligence, create panic among allies, and alert the outfit to his involvement. Instead, manipulation, observation, and strategic interventions became his primary weapons. A well-placed tip, a rumor, or the subtle exposure of internal corruption could produce far more effect than bullets ever could. By shaping the environment and controlling perception, Hayes undermined the outfit's influence, eroded trust among members, and created conditions for dismantling the organization without open warfare. As Hayes' campaigns continued, he became increasingly aware of the human cost of his work. Each manipulated individual, coerced informant, and exposed criminal carried consequences, some immediate, some long-term. He weighed these consequences constantly, refining his strategies to minimize collateral harm while maximizing impact. Every decision became part of a larger narrative of justice, strategy, and survival within the treacherous world of organized crime. By this stage, Hayes had transcended the role of a detective. He had become an invisible architect of outcomes, manipulating complex systems with a deep understanding of psychology, finance, and power dynamics. The city's very streets, institutions, and social networks were now instruments in his hands, allowing him to orchestrate results with precision. Hayes had transformed the battle against organized crime into a calculated campaign, where foresight, patience, and strategy dictated outcomes, and every move was a deliberate step toward dismantling one of the most powerful criminal organizations in history. The city's nights were alive with whispers, footsteps, and the subtle tension of unseen battles. Hayes moved like a shadow, observing, listening, and calculating. Every interaction became a test of loyalty and perception. The outfit, once seemingly invincible, now displayed cracks in its foundation, fractures that Hayes was ready to exploit with precision. He had learned the rhythm of their operations, the hesitations, the signs of panic that betrayed the overconfidence of even the most seasoned lieutenants. A single mistake in their communications, a single misstep in their coordination could ripple into catastrophic failures, and Hayes had positioned himself to capitalize on each one. Inside the outfit, the atmosphere was shifting. Rivalries simmered, mistrust spread like a slow poison, and paranoia began to undermine the previously unshakable hierarchy. Hayes carefully fed information through informants and planted subtle hints that certain members were not as loyal as they appeared. He manipulated situations so that internal disputes escalated naturally, creating infighting without revealing his involvement. The city, though appearing calm to the untrained eye, was now a living chessboard of strategy and deception, where every minor conflict had the potential to become decisive. Hayes understood that raw power alone would not dismantle the outfit. He needed leverage, and leverage meant exploiting both human weaknesses and systemic vulnerabilities. He traced the flow of money, the hidden accounts, and the connections between legitimate businesses and illicit operations. Hayes meticulously mapped every financial conduit, identifying choke points and vulnerabilities. By carefully controlling which information reached whom, he created pressure points within the organization. These points could be tightened or released depending on his objectives, giving him unprecedented influence over outcomes without ever drawing direct attention. Meanwhile, Hayes's network of informants had grown into a sophisticated intelligence apparatus. Street-level observers, bribed clerks, and even low-ranking members of the outfit provided him with daily updates. Hayes cross-referenced these with patterns from previous weeks and months, building predictive models in his mind. He could anticipate the movement of shipments, the scheduling of illicit meetings, and the potential reactions of key figures. This level of foresight allowed him to intervene at the most effective moments, disrupting operations before they could escalate into uncontrollable violence. The moral complexity of his work deepened with every passing day. Each decision carried consequences not only for criminals, but for innocents who could be caught in the crossfire. Hayes had to balance justice, strategy, and risk with meticulous care. Exposing a key figure too soon could trigger retaliation that endangered civilians. Allowing a minor crime to go unchecked could undermine his credibility and strategic advantage. He had learned to navigate these ethical minefields with the skill of a chess master, thinking several moves ahead while keeping his intentions concealed. Violence was now a calculated tool rather than an instinctive reaction. Hayes manipulated events so that the outfit's own aggression became self-defeating. Conflicts between rival factions were subtly amplified, operations sabotaged from within, and alliances disrupted. By the time the criminals realized their mistakes, the damage had already been done. Hayes had transformed the city into a stage where he directed the drama from behind the curtain, guiding events toward outcomes that systematically weakened the organization without direct confrontation. At the same time, Hayes had to manage the human element within his own ranks. Informants were unreliable, allies had their ambitions, and mistrust could fester even among those loyal to him. He implemented strict protocols, communication codes, and contingency plans to maintain control. Trust was earned through repeated consistency, and discipline was enforced with subtlety and psychological acumen rather than brute force. Every member of his network became a link in a carefully maintained chain of information and influence. The outfit's leadership, unaware of Hayes's orchestration, became increasingly desperate. Their decisions were reactionary, driven by fear of betrayal and a growing sense that control was slipping from their grasp. Hayes observed each meeting, each transaction, and each conversation, using the intelligence to manipulate the narrative further. A carefully planted rumor, a calculated act of deception, or the timely exposure of a minor infraction could escalate tensions internally, leading to self-destruction from within. By now, Hayes had achieved what few could. He had turned the city into a complex environment where power, fear, and influence were not controlled by guns alone, but by intelligence, strategy, and psychological mastery. Each night was a test of observation and judgment, every day a battle of patience and foresight. The outfit, once a monolithic force, was being dismantled not by open conflict, but by a deliberate, invisible hand that guided chaos into order and disorder into strategic advantage. Hayes had become a master of unseen warfare, his presence felt through outcomes rather than appearance, and his strategy was transforming the battle against organized crime into a game where every move was deliberate and every consequence calculated. The city reached a critical point where silence became louder than gunshots. Entire districts felt tense, as if holding their breath. Hayes sensed it immediately. This was the phase where systems either collapsed or transformed. The outfit no longer acted with confidence. Its movements were cautious, fragmented, and increasingly irrational. Leaders who once dictated the rhythm of the city now reacted impulsively, driven by fear of betrayal rather than strategy. Hayes had succeeded in destabilizing not just their operations, but their psychology. Behind closed doors, the outfit's inner circle fractured. Accusations replaced trust. Long-standing alliances crumbled as suspicion turned brothers into enemies. Hayes exploited this erosion expertly, never pushing too hard, never revealing his hand. He understood that collapse driven from within was far more effective than any external assault. When criminals destroy themselves, the city does not erupt, it exhales. Hayes escalated the pressure subtly. Financial audits were triggered through anonymous tips. Certain shipments were allowed to pass while others were intercepted, creating confusion about who was leaking information. Meetings were disrupted not by arrests, but by fear. Key figures simply stopped showing up. Some disappeared, others fled the city entirely. Each absence amplified paranoia. Each unanswered question deepened the internal rot. What made Hayes dangerous was not his authority, but his restraint. He resisted the temptation to strike openly. He knew that premature arrests would only strengthen the outfit's myth of persecution. Instead, he allowed them to suffocate slowly under their own weight. Businesses once used for laundering money became liabilities, attracting scrutiny. Bank accounts were frozen, unfrozen, then frozen again, creating instability that could not be explained internally. The outfit's leadership began to suspect that law enforcement had evolved beyond brute force, that they were facing something more sophisticated, more patient. Hayes also confronted resistance from within the police force. Corruption, long tolerated and deeply embedded, did not disappear overnight. Some officers attempted to sabotage operations. Others leaked information for personal gain. Hayes handled these threats with surgical precision. He documented everything, collecting evidence quietly, allowing corruption to expose itself naturally. Those who underestimated him found themselves isolated, transferred, or quietly removed from positions of influence. Hayes was not fighting a single enemy. He was dismantling an ecosystem of crime and complicity simultaneously. The emotional toll of this invisible war weighed heavily on him. Sleepless nights blurred into mornings filled with decisions that carried irreversible consequences. Every move risked retaliation. Every delay risked innocent lives. Hayes learned to function in a state of constant vigilance, his instincts sharpened by the understanding that failure would not come with warnings. The city did not forgive mistakes. It amplified them. As the outfit weakened, violence surged, not strategically, but chaotically. Rogue elements lashed out, desperate to reclaim lost authority. Hayes anticipated this phase. Patrols were repositioned, emergency protocols activated, and informants extracted before they could be exposed. When violence erupted, it revealed not strength, but decay. The public began to see the outfit not as untouchable rulers, but as unstable relics of a crumbling era. Media narratives shifted. Journalists, once intimidated into silence, began publishing investigations. Names surfaced, connections were exposed, public pressure mounted. Politicians distanced themselves from former allies. What had once been whispered now dominated headlines. Hayes understood the power of timing. Information released at the right moment could dismantle decades of fear in days. Within the outfit, leadership faced a brutal reality. Their control was an illusion sustained by reputation alone. Without money, loyalty evaporated. Without secrecy, fear lost its edge. Members defected, seeking immunity or escape. Each defection reinforced the collapse, accelerating a chain reaction that Hayes had engineered from the shadows. Yet the most dangerous moment had arrived. Cornered organizations do not surrender quietly. Hayes prepared for retaliation not just against himself, but against the city. Contingency plans were enacted, safe houses secured, critical witnesses relocated. The chessboard was nearly cleared, but the final moves required absolute precision. As night fell over the city, Hayes stood at the threshold of culmination. Years of observation, manipulation, restraint, and sacrifice had led to this moment. The battle was no longer about arrests or convictions. It was about redefining power itself. Whether the city would emerge stronger or descend into another cycle of corruption depended on what happened next. Hayes knew one thing with certainty. The end would not be loud. It would be decisive, quiet, and irreversible. The outfit was already dying. It simply hadn't realized it yet. The collapse did not arrive with sirens or gunfire. It came quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a structure giving way from internal decay rather than external force. One morning, the city woke up and realized that the outfit no longer dictated its rhythm. There were no orders coming from the shadows, no invisible hands redirecting money, no sudden disappearances meant to remind everyone who was in charge. Power had drained away, leaving behind only fragments of what once felt eternal. The final arrests were surgical, no dramatic raids, no media spectacle. Warrants were executed simultaneously across the city and beyond it, coordinated with a precision that left no room for escape. Bank records, testimonies, wiretaps, and financial trails converged into airtight cases. Leaders who had once believed themselves untouchable now faced a reality they had spent decades manipulating others to avoid. Some resisted. Most did not. They understood the difference between chaos and inevitability. Hayes watched from a distance. He did not attend the arrests. He did not stand behind podiums or accept public praise. He had learned long ago that visible victories often conceal deeper failures. What mattered to him was not the spectacle of justice, but its permanence. The system that had allowed the outfit to thrive, corruption, fear, silence, had been dismantled alongside the organization itself. Courtrooms became places of revelation. Testimonies exposed not just crimes, but the architecture of corruption that had sustained them. Politicians resigned. Officials were indicted. Entire departments were restructured. The public reaction was complex, relief mixed with disbelief. Many had lived their entire lives under the assumption that the outfit was an unmovable constant, a dark law of nature. Its absence felt unsettling at first, like silence after a long storm. the city began to change in subtle ways. Businesses reopened without paying protection. Neighborhoods previously ruled by intimidation saw investment and renewal. Children grew up without learning which streets to avoid at night. Fear did not vanish overnight, but it loosened its grip. The shadow that had defined the city's identity for generations receded, revealing something unfamiliar: possibility. Hayes, however, did not feel triumph. He felt exhaustion. Years of vigilance had reshaped him. Trust came slowly. Rest felt unnatural. He carried the weight of every compromise made, every informant lost, every line crossed to dismantle something far larger than himself. Victory in such wars does not arrive cleanly. It leaves scars that no commendation can erase. Offers came: promotions, advisory roles, political opportunities. Hayes declined them all. He understood the danger of becoming what you once fought against. Power, once normalized, corrodes intention. Instead, he chose distance. He remained within the system, but no longer at its center. His role was complete. Years later, the outfit became history. Studied, analyzed, dramatized. Books simplified it. Films romanticized it. People argued about whether such an organization could ever return. Hayes knew the truth. Systems like that do not disappear forever. They wait. They adapt. They return in new forms, wearing different names. But he also knew something else. They could be stopped, not by force alone, but by patience, integrity, and an understanding of how power truly functions. The war against organized crime was never about criminals versus police. It was about whether society chose comfort over accountability, silence over responsibility. As Hayes walked through the city one evening, unnoticed among ordinary people, he felt something rare: quiet satisfaction. Not pride, not relief, just the knowledge that for a time the balance had shifted, that fear had lost, that corruption had been exposed, that the city had been given a chance. And sometimes that is the greatest victory possible, not the destruction of evil, but the interruption of its rule. The city moved forward, and the shadow did not follow.